Yeah, it'll be quick. 35 minutes. Cool. And I guess, Nikhil, welcome to the show. And it's we've been knowing each other for a long time since you were at the Cello days. So my very first question is actually about this. How did you, both you and Jesse, of which I've both known for a long time, how did you guys decided to create Predicate, and what is the journey from sort of Cello days and up until now? Obviously, right now, just like a few days ago, I was listening to Stripe's co-founder, talking about how they've acquired Bridge, and their main focus over the past years of trying to solve to build the infrastructure, the API for the internet money transferring. One of their major bottleneck is sort of compliance, right? And which is exactly what you guys are building. So I want to know like your journey thinking about approaching the problem of compliance, and how did you guys end up here?
Yeah. I mean, and compliance is like not the immediate sexy topic, right?
Yeah,
of what one builds in crypto, and there's an inherent tension oftentimes.
Right.
So yeah, I think for like context, like Jesse and I used to work together. Like he was at C Labs, I was at the foundation, and we first met when we were doing Uniswap deployment together. So I led the entire governance process, the ecosystem development of getting Uniswap to be like, cool, we're going to deploy. And then Jesse led the technical deployment for that entire thing. So we first met then. And after that, we just kind of kept in touch, and we just kept talking about, what are major blockers to growth in the industry? What are things that we're really excited by, or things that we were like, hey, these are things that have to be built. And it was always towards a view of long-term adoption, right? Not something that we're like, oh yeah, this is here for 6 months, 1 year, and then that's it. It was like, what do we think are long-term things that have to be built? So we kept talking about it. And then I think one thing we really just kept coming back to was actually on compliance. And we were like, this just seems like a blocker. And it's, for him, he was on his technical side, he was managing some of the compliance things as it related to the interop for Cello, a lot of those conversations around it as well. And then on my end, I have a background in policy. And so these are things that would come up all the time amongst regulators. And then on top of that, we'd be working with some of the larger protocols. Like I was working with a lot of the larger protocols who are also having to navigate a lot of these questions.
What are some of the key compliance sort of bottlenecks you're talking about? Are you talking about specifically about KYC, KYB, or?
It wasn't KYC. I think that was my view at the time was, and it still is, that I was like, we don't need to build a new KYC platform. I was like, there's actually other KYC solutions. And when we were thinking about this, there were other KYC solutions that were there, right? Like Violet, Quadrata.
There are a lot of them.
There was a lot, and they had raised money in the 2021 market. And so I was like, but we don't need to build a KYC, because I was like, I think that's all it takes is, like a Coinbase to launch a KYC. But it was rather that there is an inherent thing, I think, of crypto. It's actually, there's permissionlessness, but also fully permission. I was like, there's a full expressivity of that. It's not that it's always just one or the other. And I saw Jesse and I saw KYC as this hammer, when you don't actually need a hammer for everything. And so this could be, for flow of funds. This could be for, it was even at Cello, it was community currencies. How does a community currency deal with the fact that we don't want users in other markets? So it's this kind of full extent of expressivity, and we saw that was actually a gap. No one was enabling truly kind of policies for pre-transactions, or policies for transaction itself. It was just top-down KYC. Everything was top-down. And I think that was really where we really came at it, was how do you think about more of a bottoms-up mechanism of the full expressivity of policies, which reflects really the global state.
And I guess in this context then, it's not really about KYC, it's not really about KYB, but more so about, the focus is not really kind of you guys creating a set of criteria where, user fill out your first name, last name, your passport, and your ID and all that, but rather you want to create a sort of open standards where, your customer, your clients, clients of Predicate, they will be able to define an arbitrary logic. Essentially that's being executed before any transactions being processed on chain, right?
Exactly. So I don't think we don't even really use the term compliance. It is policies, right? And there's lots of reasons for why one might want policies. And this could be for risk management, not just compliance, right? It's not just anti-money laundering compliance. It is risk management. There is specific business conditions for stablecoin minting, any of those kinds of things, and it's that full universe of policies. And then I think for us too as well, it was then like, this has to be, if we talk about the world of policies, this actually then requires it to be a censorship-resistant infrastructure, not us as a technology service provider.
Right.
Because if we're saying the full universe of policies, right? And so in that case, this is a censorship-resistant system that anyone can build and enforce their policies, whether that's someone in the US, someone in the Middle East, a project in Asia, that entire thing. So it's for us, it's even then like it then goes to a world of
you
like,
can't ask your clients to just trust you guys.
exactly, and it's also, I think it's like, if we're sitting in the US and we're this technology service provider for policies, we have to specifically say, hey, you in another market, you can't build your own policy.
Yeah.
You can only use a set that we're defining here because we are in the US, a domiciled company in the US, you have to live and die by that. We said that's actually not the right approach. So it's not that so when we think of even our partners, it's not that they're our like clients or our customers. It's actually that they're building on Predicate. They're building on a policy enforcement network.
So how far along are you guys now?
Yeah,
so you guys been started since 2024 or 2023?
We were ideating on it in early 2023 and then shifted over full time in October 2023. So we left Solo then.
Okay.
And we have been building since then.
Right.
So it was, the first thing was we did a ton of customer research, deep dive in fall of 2023. We had the idea and we're like, wait, but we should really validate this before spending a lot more time on it. So we did that, and then we went with EigenLayer, where it made a lot of sense for us to be able to bootstrap that network as we think of that censorship-resistant system. And then, where we're at now, we've been building the whole time, and we just had our first like live mainnet implementation go up a few weeks ago.
Yeah. And you were talking about customers. Obviously, like, the concept of sort of transaction pre-checks, are there any other competitors that were pre-existing, or who do you consider as kind of like competitor, or do they even exist today?
Yeah, I don't know if we have it. I don't know if I see anyone who's a direct competitor. And I think there might be ones that I've seen emerge. Like I feel like I've actually seen some projects recently in their pitch decks, like start adding Predicate for things that they do. And so I've seen that, but when we first started, there was no competitors, no one who was doing it. I don't think anyone is tackling it in the same way that we are. So the closest might be,
I guess the compliance, or they're not really the...
No, so that was it was a funny thing. When we were raising our first round, there was a bunch of people who were like, wait, isn't this a competitor to a TRM or a chain analysis?
Because I was actually, I previously worked at a fund before, and TRM is actually one of the deck that sent through me, and I was like, that's interesting because you guys later on actually worked with TRM, right?
Yeah, so TRM is one of our partners, for example, and it's because these guys, like the risk score providers, they have huge investigation and forensics teams. They partner with governments to give them, information. So like, for example, TRM will get information from the Israel IDF on, like potential addresses that are tied to Hamas, right? That's their job. Then they have to create this entire data system. But then what we sit at is we are the policy enforcement mechanism. So how do you actually enable, for example, TRM's data to be used at the block, like at your application level, at a smart contract level?
Are these considered being sort of like an integration to Predicate, where it kind of like a add-on data set where every other Predicate clients will be able to tap into, say, I want to, TRM has this awesome data set which identifies a potential blacklist or whitelist of addresses, and I'll be able to just directly tap into that.
Exactly. So for us, it's building this entire ecosystem of information providers, right? So it's an ecosystem of different providers whose data you can use when you want to build and enforce a policy. So this is where it's like, you're building the policy through Predicate. You want to specify certain data sources for how you want that to be checked.
Right.
And so TRM is one of those. And we kind of create that open network that people can access in order to do so.
Yeah. And how many clients do you guys currently have now?
So we currently have live just our first one that just went live. We're about to go live pretty soon with some work with Uniswap as well as Plume.
Nice.
So awesome. Those are two that are happening quite soon. Cool. And then we have a lineup of like a number of other projects that we're like quite deep with. So the first one we went live with was Aleo for privacy and
Can you talk more about it, because I've seen you posting a bunch about Aleo.
Yeah.
And, so it's very exciting.
No, it's a really fun one. It's a really tricky one as well, because like privacy is something that, it was actually one of the reasons why I got interested in crypto. Yeah. How do you actually enabling privacy is really important.
Yeah.
But one of the biggest blockers to privacy systems to be able to even operate, for the privacy protocols to even exist, is this challenge around compliance.
Yeah.
Like all it takes is for like North Korea to be like, great, this is like the best place for us to move our funds, and it becomes a huge problem.
Right.
And so you actually need a mechanism to deal with that. And there's like centralized ways of building your own deposit screen, or you can actually have a more of a generalizable system.
Right.
So this was like what we had envisioned, and yeah, Aleo is the first one. So it's now, Aleo has a bridge called Verilink, and so the transactions going from Ethereum to Aleo are all checked by Predicate before it actually goes through.
Yeah, I actually have this question while you're talking about privacy, because obviously what you're building, and for the longest time, I feel like the compliance sector of crypto is somewhat just kind of like at the average level. It's not like experiencing kind of like a boom like DeFi or whatnot, is precisely because the concept of compliance in crypto is somewhat on the contrary of the crypto spirit, right?
Yeah.
And what's your viewpoint of it? Because obviously now in 2025, we're at a drastically different market compared to like even a few years ago. We have loads of centralized players talking about coming into the space. BFA just talked about if the stable bill got passed, they're actually going to launch a Bank of America crypto stable coin, which is huge.
Yep.
So what is your viewpoint on this, and your thoughts on, because I feel like Predicate is actually, if the bill is going to pass and regulatory environment is going to be more open to crypto, services or platforms or networks like Predicate is actually, at the forefront of connecting the sort of Web 2 and Web 3, because you've heard Stripe talking about compliance being the biggest bottleneck. You talk about for a Web 2 company to get into Web 3, compliance is probably the number one thing they need to actually fix before anything else happens. Right?
Yeah. So our worldview is that you have permissionless protocols, and upon that there are different decentralized applications that centralized actors, users all take advantage of.
Right.
And I think the best example I can give of this, and it's awesome that this is like now live, is like Uniswap.
Right.
Uniswap is a permissionless decentralized exchange. I philosophically do not think that you should actually have policies for the underlying Uniswap exchange.
Right.
Right. It's fully decentralized. It's a protocol. It's a primitive. But V4 hooks are now custom hooks that I see them as dApps on the Uniswap protocol.
Right.
And that's where you start having the expressivity. So it's all about expressivity on these different systems, right? And so far it's only been at the UI level, and we're like, oh, like the UI is fine because that's the application. But I think the UI is actually not, it's so easy to bypass.
Yeah.
And really we're going into a world of more expressivity on applications that sit on top that still have smart contracts.
Right.
And I think that's like how we envision the world. So again, like Ethereum is permissionless blockchain. Aleo is a permissionless privacy blockchain.
Right.
But there are different centralized points for Aleo, for example, of entry, where it's for example, it's a bridge, right? You can actually have a policy there, and there's a team that manages the bridge.
Yeah.
Same with the Uniswap V4. There's going to be different hook developers who are building their own custom hooks. They're going to want that because they're seeding liquidity. I think then, like long tail, I think it starts going into the world. We've seen two avenues for this. One is you have all these different rollups, right? So Plume is an excellent example of, we're building an RWA like platform on an L2. And so we have to have our policies because we're creating this ecosystem that's really tailored for that. I don't like, that's their entire approach. Another one is I think there's like the world of different rollups having all these different types of things. And then I think the other one is on intents, like off-chain actions, right? So when we have intents, you're actually now going to have expressivity of where your transaction is routed and how it's being done. Those transactions are usually being facilitated by liquidity provided by centralized actors who have to think about how their liquidity is being used. And I think that's the world that we go into later. And so again, this is you're leveraging decentralized protocols, but there are centralized actors who are facilitating liquidity and execution.
Right. And I was thinking about sort of, because Predicate kind of sits in front of the user interactions with all of these layer twos, will DAO play a role in sort of setting up these policies, or is mostly just setting up by the centralized, the labs, or the project foundation?
We envision it as a full mix, and so in some instances it might just be a labs. In other instances it could be the DAO. So Aleo is a really good example that went basically DAO route, and they had a governance proposal, ARC 100, and like these are all the different requirements that we want to have. Like they're like, here's the different things that a bridge should consider if they're going to deploy on Aleo, and you need to have some set of this. Like they didn't say specifically all of them, but they're like, you need to have like a number of these for us to feel comfortable. If not, like the validators will not accept transactions from this bridge. That's
sure.
very much a governance-based approach. In the case of Plume, I think they've been a bit more specific on what are the policies that they want.
Yeah.
So again, it just varies on the organization type and like whether they need something that's more centralized, something that's more decentralized. Again, this is like that expressivity, right? It can be a top-down view. It also can be a bottom-up.
Yeah, right. And let's switch gear a little bit to talk about sort of Predicate's business, right? Because as sort of like participant in restaking, I there are several factors I pay specific attention to. Number one is slashing. Number two is rewards, right? And number three is how are the protocols, I guess not even in the restaking world, but nowadays in Web3, we're talking more about the fundamentals, talking more about the revenue. How is Predicate, thinking about getting the revenue from these sort of first batch of clients, and how this revenue model is going to evolve into the future? Are you guys going to have a token? Because I feel like even nowadays in ABS's world, a lot of the projects actually opt into the traditional SaaS route instead of launching a token that's potentially have minimum utility, right?
Yeah.
What's your approach on this?
So starting from first principles, it's like thinking about what do we do? So Predicate enforces policies really just for billion-dollar networks.
Yeah.
That's where we should be sitting. Mm-hmm. And if we're enforcing policies for billion-dollar networks, we are actually then functioning as critical infrastructure.
Yeah.
If we go down, transactions basically stop going through billion-dollar networks.
Yeah.
So we start from that first. So if you start with there, then the next question is, okay, so where is the value lie in this?
Yeah.
One is in and of itself, the inherent value of you securing billion-dollar networks for policies. Not too different from, interop protocols for securing cross-chain messaging, or blockchains even for securing transactions, right? So there's that inherent value, which is crucial here because that's valuable in and of itself. Then you start thinking about, okay, great, so what are the other facets here for revenue?
So you guys actually requires a ton of economic security when thinking about it, because
depends on the use case,
just
right?
the sheer volume of transactions that might flow through Predicate.
Exactly, so it depends on the use case, but if you're thinking about a bridge, you want to have sufficient economic security to deal with any size of bridge transaction, right? Because that's really it. It also depends a little bit on the policy here too, right? Because we can be halting transactions if we go down.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that funds are lost.
Yeah.
But then we can also be used for security-based policies as well, for anomaly detection to prevent an exploit. Then economic security really matters, right? Because you want to make sure that it's high enough that a malicious actor isn't incentivized to take over and then send a malicious transaction. So this is where underlying economic security, censorship resistance matters a lot. Then once we do that, I think you start with that fundamental. So there's inherent economic value there. Then the next one is you can start thinking about any form of transaction fees, right? Because we have our operators that are doing essentially a form of compute and are issuing signatures.
Yeah.
So they need to be compensated for that.
Yeah.
And because we sit in front of a transaction, you can have some form of economic value there.
Right.
And I think really that will just depend on how we think about a fee switch and what is the appropriate level of fees needed for operators for the level of compute that they have to do for different policies.
Right. I would assume for the compute intensity is actually not that much, but the unit economics that flows through the ecosystem is going to be kind of like the deterministic factor.
Yeah, I think it's the overall securing the entire network and the volume.
Yeah, and how far along are you guys in the process of setting up obviously you guys are live on mainnet, on EigenLayer. You have your own sort of initial set of operators kind of operating the Predicate networks. How far along are you guys in terms of experimenting these parameters, and when do you guys think the first complete loop of the MVP so-called will be achieved?
Yeah. So we've basically permissioned our operator network now. So you can't join as a new operator. You have to reach out to the team and get whitelisted. And that was intentional on our end because we're actually not activating any slashing right now.
Yeah.
We don't think we need slashing quite yet. Policies can be enforced without slashing conditions, and because everything is fully deterministic, we know who the operators are. Eventually, we'll have to open up the network, but the result is for now, because we don't have slashing conditions, we're not distributing any rewards. We haven't actually we haven't launched our token or anything like that. We just have these operators moving signatures. Eventually, we could add slashing, and I think we'll kind of figure out what's the best approach for that. But we'll kind of experiment and evolve that over time.
Yeah.
The other perk here right now is for operators, the thing that they have to run is quite efficient and low, so they shouldn't be spending a lot of money to be running an operator on Predicate.
So who, let's talk about, the client side then, we talk about the supply side of the economic security and the operators. Obviously you have your initial batch of customers that, you guys have already, onboarded. Who and which sector are you guys looking into, down the road for the next 3 to 6 month period? And which sector you're the most excited for?
Which sector am I most excited for? In the next 3 to 6 months, I don't think this is a contrarian view in any way, but I think for us, out of the projects that or the types of things that could then build on Predicate, I think it starts going into stable coins and payments. I think it's that world of those payment flows, transaction flows, potentially some of the things that it kind of starts segueing a little bit into RWAs.
Yeah.
I think that's the one that in the next 3 to 6 months will be the most fascinating to explore, just because there's a lot of development happening in that space.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And cool, I guess the final question, a few hot takes.
Yeah.
Number one is, what's your view on the current sort of ABS landscape? What's your view on, Predicate continue to participate in the whole restaking ecosystem, or are you guys thinking about potentially doing something of your own?
Yeah. I'm actually curious to get your thoughts as well, because from an eigenlayer, from your vantage point. I'm obviously so bullish on Eigenlayer and their long-term vision, what they're able to offer. I think it's just the job of ABS is to go and actually get utility for all of it. So my job is to make sure that we continue to go and get more and more builders on Predicate, more and more things that are creating policies.
Have you guys started charging, by the way?
No,
not
we
yet.
won't start charging yet, because again, we don't have any slashing. There's none of those risks. So at the end of the day, I think it's fine. Eventually, we'll have to charge it, but I think it's also an important point here of a question of do we as a centralized company activate a fee switch, or should it actually be based off of a distributed network who determines when a fee switch should be activated?
That's a good point.
Right?
Yeah.
Because if it's a censorship-resistant network, that's supposed to be decentralized as a result. Who is the one who's actually thinking about?
You guys are kind of a very interesting case, because Predicate is sort of the very best example in terms of, you guys has to be decentralized in a way to make the whole thing work.
Yeah, it does. Well, it has to be censorship resistant is the most important part.
Yeah.
Now, decentralization is probably in our mind maybe the best way of doing it.
Yeah.
But it has to be censorship resistant. Now, from there, it's if we're activating a fee switch and all of those things, I think that starts begging the question of, is this censorship resistant or not?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think that's that's the way we've been thinking about it. We don't need to activate any type of fees yet, and so we've kept it that way. If we need to, then either users would pay the fees, which would be very minimal, or it would be the application can subsidize the fees on behalf of the user.
Right.
Again, depending on the complexity of the policy, this could be anywhere from a few cents to something more. It kind of just depends.
Yeah, that's kind of the transaction fee, just everyone sort of embedded in your day-to-day transactions.
Yeah, and it's not too different from Oracle networks and some of the interop protocols.
Yes, yeah.
But yeah, from an Eigenlayer ABS standpoint, I think it's all of our jobs to actually go and get utility. That was the whole point of Eigenlayer, right? It's cool, you've bootstrapped your network for a distributed network. Now go out and do what you're supposed to do, be product oriented. Build a good product, get utility, get usage, make sure you actually have utility, all of those things.
Yeah, and it sounds like you guys certainly have enjoyed the bootstrap benefits, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Let us move way faster. Where we have to, Aleo needed us to go live basically as soon as their network was going up or when their bridge was going up. That was if we were oh yeah, we'll be ready in a year and a half, it's what are we doing here?
That's sort of a pattern that I've seen personally again and again in Eigenlayer ecosystem. If you have a pretty good business model and you have decent connection in the industry, you can immediately ship this and start to get clients ASAP, right? And I think that those are very good signals, allowing you to then sort of sit down and start and kind of have a full breadth of a view on the ecosystem itself. When are we going to do the fee switch? How much are we going to compensate the operators and the online risk-takers, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's how we thought about it. I'm curious on how you've seen it from your
I think point. So. I literally just wrote a piece today that I think I think restaking is going to eat the world. not necessarily like eigenlayer or symbiotic or Jito, restaking protocols, but the restaking concept will continually to be valid, just because how great it is to bootstrap a network, right? Because you have this intrinsic demand from the token holders, regardless of what token it is, right? Ethereum, Bitcoin, Eigen nowadays, right? Or even Uniswap, Uni token, right? These token holders, they have, essentially limitless urge to get more yield. And you as a new protocol sitting on top of these sort of existing networks, whether it's layer 1 or the alt layer ones, Unichain or whatever, then you get immediate benefits that liquidity gets bootstrapped and channeled into your system, and operators then follow suit, right? So I think restaking as a whole is going to be very much commoditized across the board in Web3, over the next few years. And the $1 million question is then, what is the major factor that you guys look into when picking a restaking provider, or are you guys to build a platform yourself, right? Because, a lot of the valuable stuff or valuable architecture, I think these days, EigenLayer has already open sourced it, right? And even Authentic has already open sourced it, right? So these things are no longer sort of the gated or even compared to 2 years ago, 1 year ago, these things are very hard for anybody to conceptualize and to build on their own. But now, with all of these companies working together, you kind of have a available infrastructure boilerplate that you can already use, right? So personally, I still think that right now for EigenLayer, it's very advantageous to continue to work with EigenLayer just because the support and whatnot. But for you guys, obviously, you guys are chain agnostic, right? And you'll then need to think about it's rather sort of the restaking protocol, but also, what restaking strategy or what restaking token you guys are going to accept. Where should we sort of issue the rewards, right? Are we going to issue the rewards on Ethereum or Aleo, which is kind of like one of your major clients, right? So I think these are the key questions that the restaking world as a whole going to figure out in the next stage. And I think obviously this morning I talked with Authentic, and I think one point that left a lasting impression for me is right now I think we're still at the experimentation phase, right? None of the projects has completed this sort of the initial life cycle of slashing rewards and conducting sort of the basic MVP of the tasks that are flowing through the system. So I think really at the end of the day, we really need to wait until 1 or 2 projects complete that cycle, and which I think Predicate will be quick in that competition. And we'll see sort of how restaking shaping up at that time.
Yeah, no, this makes sense. And I think like the other things I've been thinking about as well are like, for us, there's like no reason to shift off of EigenLayer or do something else. Like it makes a lot of sense for us. And then I think the other things you can start doing is, I actually think we'll be thinking less and less of like where the rewards are really coming to, because I think like Nuffle, for example, enables your rewards to happen across different chains regardless. Like it could be that someone on Plume is still staking into Eigen and then able to get the reward while they're sitting on Plume without having to do anything, right? Or even Aleo for that matter. It just comes down to the interop aspect and really the intense aspect. And then I think the other part as well is like I think the future will also involve being able to add other assets into that protocol, right? Like as part of your security. So like another one I can talk about is like Caldera, right? Caldera announced their meta layer, and I think they're planning to launch a token as well, and we will be supporting like policies on their entire like roll-up architecture. And so one of the things we can do that gets really cool there is like in the future you can start thinking about, so the security for Caldera is like policies for different rollups. You can add the asset for the Caldera token, which presumably will be securing their rollups. You can also add it saying like to the policy infrastructure as well. And I think that becomes really important because again, it's that censorship resistant nature, right? Your censorship resistance should be tied to your own system.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that is where
100%.
censorship resistance
Yeah,
really
yeah.
matters. And so I can see that also happening as well. So then it's this like truly expressive system
Yeah.
where it doesn't really matter which chain you're on.
Yeah.
And your enforcement is happening on all these different chains, and your security is also being covered by all these different tools.
Right,
as well.
right. That's super important, I think.
Yeah.
And I still think the industry has a long way to figure out exactly how to compensate these things and how to design these things. I think we're really at the infant phase, and not even in the infant phase. I feel like we're literally like moving 1 millimeter towards whatever the future that we can achieve. And for me, it's quite exciting and very exciting to see EigenLayer literally enabled the speed of go-to-market.
Yeah.
Which is super important, I think.
Yeah, I'm curious on like how this like thing around like slashing goes, and I don't think we've talked about it enough in EigenLayer ecosystem, but not
Are
everything.
you guys? So I would imagine you guys have to sort of put in place slashing.
At some point,
Yeah.
but it really just comes down to like what is each protocol like, what is each AVS doing, and do they need slashing or not, and what are those conditions, right? Like
Yeah.
I think of an interop protocol, like slashing is really important there,
Right.
right? Like slashing for someone like Hyperlane matters a lot
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
interop. For some of the stuff for some of our policies, like slashing isn't necessarily
Yeah.
needed.
Yeah.
Like even for like let's say for like a risk management, like AML type, like anti-money laundering use case,
Right.
if like slashing or the full extent of slashing may not be necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's also a spectrum of slashing. So I'm actually curious to see like what happens in that world, and like what are things that are actually slashed, what are things that aren't slashed, and what are things that you have to have like the full extent of like
I think that's
how much
that's a
slashing.
part of the challenge of the entire industry is helping not only the projects to understand, you don't necessarily need to slash the operator full, right? You can actually just ban them, right? You can eject
Yeah, exactly.
them, right?
Right, exactly. Now they don't get the they don't get the economic
Yeah,
upside anymore.
Yeah, and then you can eject them for 3 months. You can eject them for 6 months. The variability is actually huge. And also, EigenLayer has been talking about redistribution of slash assets.
Yeah.
Which adds another layer of complexity.
Exactly. Instead of getting slashed, it's like, oh wait, no, like I just lost more money that I would have
Yeah.
gotten, and so now you're now not at a loss, but you don't get the economic rewards.
Yeah. So the variability is really sort of key to the whole equation here. And I think, a part of me is worried about this variability that for protocol itself, it's going to be very hard to decide exactly what we should do to sort of organize the ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
To organize the underlying infrastructure layer. And for the retail or for restakers or for anybody watching the AVSs, they are having a hard time to comprehend what the hell is going on the operator slashing level. Why are you not slashing, and what is the consideration? These protocols are making, why are they choose to eject or why are they choose to slash? I think right now, our industry doesn't really have like a whole standard for that. Even for Ethereum, these things aren't really talked about for a lot of times. So I think it's good that we start to talk about it, just because so many ABSs are facing the same problem. But I think it'll be interesting because I think there will be a competition. Whoever first enables slashing, is going to get a lot of buzz.
Yep.
People will kind of like catch an eye on it, and they will be like, okay, this is the protocol that's leading the way. So I think it's also a part of it is market sentiment, right?
Yeah, and it informs others, right? So a first mover who does like a deep dive, thinks deeply about it, and puts in place the first thing, it informs others to do like, do we do the same thing? Do we do it differently? But it sets that anchoring point.
Right.
And it's like you can almost like think of it as like there will be a library of different types of like things based off of what you need to do.
Yeah.
And we were seeing it in the policy aspect as well of, like one protocol can spend a ton of time building out their policy, and another one could be like, wait, these are not always easy things to make a decision on, and you just look and say, wait, what is another one doing? Let's just like take the same thing.
Are you guys like making templates for these protocols?
We will be, right? So what we can do is we can create a library, and that is like where we can go. Is like Aleo spent a lot of time thinking about it because it's a privacy protocol based out of the U.S. That has can be very much immediately in the regulatory crosshairs.
Right.
And so they spent a lot of time thinking about it and worked with some of the best legal minds in the country to determine it. Plume is like great. Aleo already spent the time doing it. Let's just, what are they doing? This seems reasonable. It doesn't change our user experience too much. Let's use the same thing.
But I'm glad that, for you guys then, you guys start to accumulate those knowledge and information, data points, similar to EigenLayer, are starting to accumulate data points for off-chain networks.
Right.
So I think, given it time, then people coming in, they can just pick, from the library.
Yep.
Okay, this thing makes sense for me. And even like I'm US based, this is, how typically US regulation are asking for or calling for.
Right.
And I can just like one click deploy it. That's super cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. All right. Well, very nice chat with you, Nikhil, and thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for doing this. This was awesome.
Cool.
Thanks, man.
All right. Yeah.